What if the person living next door to you was hiding bodies in her backyard? And what if justice didn't come knocking until years after the concrete had already dried? Before we dive into this messed up story, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on stories like these. Crime committed. On the night of February 24, 2000, inside the cold and clinical walls of Huntsville, Texas, the state prepared to end a life. Betty Lou Beets, a 62-year-old, partially deaf, and a grandmother with a soft southern drawl. At midnight, she was strapped to a gurney. There was no struggle or last-minute chaos, but only silence and certainty of what was coming. But long before that chamber, long before the fourth lines and witnesses, Betty Lou Beets had already written her own fate. But to understand her story, we've got to rewind time way back and dive into her life filled with hardships, silence, and violence. Who was Betty Lou Beets? Betty Lou Beets was born in 1973 in rural North Carolina, into poverty so deep that it dictated every choice before she could make one of her own. Her childhood wasn't gentle because she was partially deaf, which isolated her into a world where sounds felt muffled and emotions were unspoken. When Betty was just 12 years old, her mother went to a mental institution and left the family entirely. That left Betty with her 5 younger siblings, and she had to take care of them. For her school life, it ended early. And behind those closed doors, another trauma haunted her till adulthood. Allegations she later made that her father sexually abused her. The claims surfaced too late to be proven, but early enough to explain why she never trusted men. When Betty was 15, she got married just to escape the hardships in her life. Her first husband was Robert Franklin Branson, a man twice her age. The marriage produced 5 children and years of domestic violence. Betty claimed that he beat her, and at one point, she said he shot her during an argument. Betty shot her husband back, but both survived and no one was imprisoned. That moment mattered more than anyone realized because Betty learned something different early on, that violence didn't always come with consequences. This was a pattern that defined her entire life. Marriage after marriage, 6 husbands in total, one of them twice. Every relationship of hers was soaked in jealousy, alcohol, rage, and police. One of her husbands claimed that Betty tried to run him down with her car. She shot another husband in the stomach. Each time, the system looked the other way. Whenever the police were involved, charges were dropped, incidents were brushed aside, and domestic violence was treated as a private issue, not a warning sign. By the time Betty moved to Gun Barrel City, Texas, in the early 1980s, the pattern was already set. And then, husbands stopped surviving. The first disappearance. Doyle Wayne Barker was Betty's 4th husband now. He was a firefighter, a heavy drinker, and known for explosive arguments. In October 1981, after a heated fight, Doyle disappeared. Betty told neighbors he stormed out and never came back. She didn't report him missing like a normal person or search for him. Instead, what she did would blow your mind. She sold off her husband's belongings and started collecting his firefighter pension. And the worst part, no one questioned her. But in reality, Doyle hadn't left. He was shot in the back of his head. His body was dragged into the backyard and buried beneath the concrete floor of a boat shed. The grave was entirely sealed. This secret was buried for 2 whole years. The second murder. In 1983, Betty got married again. This time, it was Jimmy Don Beets, another firefighter. She must have thought, another steady pension. This man trusted her. But after a few months of marriage, Jimmy fell asleep on the couch in their lakefront home, and he never woke up again. Betty had shot him twice in the back of the head. There was no fight and no warning at all. With the help of her son, she buried Jimmy under a decorative wishing well in the front yard. Then, she staged a boating incident. She sabotaged his boat on purpose and scattered his heart medication. She did the same with Jimmy. After shooting him, she reported him missing, and it strangely worked. Search teams scoured the lake, and no body was found. Jimmy was declared dead, and his insurance money came in, pension checks followed, and Betty collected over $100,000. For a while, she got away with everything. The truth came out. The luck of Betty Lou Beets ran out in 1985, not because of police brilliance, but because of a conscience she couldn't control. An anonymous tip widely believed to have come from someone close to the family, led investigators back to the house in Gun Barrel City. Forensic teams arrived with jackhammers. The neighborhood watched in horror as the decorative wishing well was demolished. Underneath, they found the remains of Jimmy Don Beets. Moving to the back, they broke through the boat shed floor and found the skeletal remains of Doyle Barker. Both had been executed in the exact same manner. Shots to the back of the head with a .38 caliber pistol. The trial and the legacy. The trial was a media sensation. The wishing well widow was no longer the frail grandmother she pretended to be. Her own children took the stand against her. Her son, Robert, detailed how she had coached him on how to help her dispose of the bodies. He spoke of a mother who used her children as accomplices in her quest for financial gain. The prosecution argued that Betty Lou Beets didn't kill out of fear or self-defense. She killed for cold, hard cash. The jury agreed. She was sentenced to death. Her final years were spent in a whirlwind of appeals. Her lawyers argued that her history of abuse, the battered woman syndrome, should have mitigated her sentence. They argued her deafness had prevented her from receiving a fair trial. But the evidence of the two bodies, buried in separate years in the same yard, was too much to overcome. Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection, leaving behind a legacy that serves as a grim reminder. Sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't the ones hiding in the shadows. They're the ones living next door, tending to their wishing wells and waiting for the concrete to dry. The legal firestorm and the battered woman defense. The case of Betty Lou Beets became a lightning rod for the battered woman syndrome defense. As her execution date neared in early 2000, even some international human rights groups stepped in. Her lawyers argued that her trial had been fundamentally unfair because the jury never truly understood the decades of torture she had endured at the hands of her previous husbands. They argued that her brain had been rewired by trauma. However, the prosecution countered with a devastating point. If she was a terrified victim, why didn't she kill her husbands during a fight? Why did she wait until they were asleep on the couch? Why the insurance papers? This debate turned Betty Lou into a symbol of the tension between clinical psychology and the hard line of the law. When Governor George W. Bush refused to grant her clemency, it was more than just a decision on one woman. It was a statement on the limits of using past trauma as a license for future murder. A black widow. Psychologists often categorize Betty Lou as a classic black widow, a female serial killer who murders those closest to her, usually for financial gain. But Betty's profile is more complex. Her history of extreme domestic abuse creates a murky gray area that has been debated for decades. Was she a monster born of greed? Or was she a broken woman who had been conditioned by 30 years of violence to believe that the only way to leave a man was to bury him? The money motive is clear, the $100,000 in insurance, but the psychological comfort of the concrete is more telling. By burying them in her yard, she kept control over the men who had once controlled her. She didn't just want them dead, she wanted them under her feet, silent forever. The haunted property in Texas. Today, the house in Gun Barrel City still stands, but it carries a weight that no amount of renovation can erase. New owners have come and gone, often unaware that the front yard where they might plant flowers was once topped by a wishing well that hid a human secret. The case changed how Texas handles capital murder involving domestic violence, but for the community, the memory remains a dark stain. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a white knitted scarf and offers you a seat on the couch. So, what do you think about Betty Lou Beets' case? Share your thoughts in. He comments below, and before you leave, hit that subscribe button.